Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm very good, Jeremy. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. So first of all, I want to thank you for doing this interview with me. It is such a pleasure and such an honor. I was very happy when I got contacted by the manager of communication to do this interview, and never in my life I would have thought that I would have met you. So I'm very, very happy that you have agreed to do this.
Thank you so much. It's actually my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So I know you are a CFA charter holder and you're the managing director for the of education for the CFA Institute. So maybe tell us a little bit more about that and how long have you been part of this, and tell us a little bit about your work experience with the CFA Institute.
Sure. I initially worked on the buy side for a mutual fund company and loved it. But in the aftermath of the tech bubble, and I'm dating myself a little bit here, I thought, yeah, I would get out of industry just for a little bit, try something else, and then maybe come back later. And I saw this awesome opening with CFA Institute at the time. It was a very different organization at the time, but there was a product they had called conference proceedings. And so the job was I would go to our own conferences, equity, fixed income, the annual conference, all of these, and listen to all of the presentations and then pick the several good ones and help the conference speaker convert that into a very good written piece. Then we would then compile and send out to our members. So that appealed to me because I'm a sort of a lifelong learner, and it just exposed me to people I never thought I would meet, and just really kept me sharp in finance. And that eventually evolved into writing the CFA curriculum, writing and editing readings, and just my interest kept me at CFA Institute now almost 20 years. So I went from being interested in the curriculum, and there's only so many times you can go through our own curriculum, right? So
Right.
eventually I gravitated toward learning more about the education industry at large and then the testing industry. And so now, kind of bringing those three perspectives together in education and working on making some uh, real improvements to how we teach and educate people that are coming through the program. That effort really started with our transition to computer-based testing a few years
Mm-hmm.
ago to do
Mm-hmm.
paper-based testing. So that gave us some agility and the ability to start to do more creative things on the curriculum side. And so I'll be excited to talk about that today and what we've got in store.
Yes, and that's exactly what we'll be talking about. I do want to go and dig a little bit deeper on the changes that are happening into it of the CFA program. And I think there are six major changes happening, which were announced a couple of months ago. And I do want to start with the first one, which is the digital practical skills modules. And so my understanding was that I think the CFA program now is built more to teach the candidates on like how to use the knowledge more like in the practical world. So can you like elaborate a little bit better on that?
Yeah, I've loved that the CFA program has always tried to be practical and that it's teaching you things that you will eventually need on the job. But I've always felt a couple of things. One is that we could do better with this very last step. Like it's one thing to understand how to practically apply something on the job, another thing to have actually done it, right? And so when you've actually been through it once, it just becomes easier to implement, right? Also, one of the weaknesses in the curriculum that we used to have is it was tough to be leading edge. So you would see, yeah, for example, a new a new concept really starts to take hold in the market. Like years back, ESG, when ESG really
Right.
started to become a
Right.
thing. We, you know, of course, we started to integrate it into the curriculum, but I would have loved to for us to be able to move a little bit faster on that because even if we're not going to go to great depths, I think if someone's going to become a CFA charter holder and there's an important topic out there in the industry, that them having some awareness helps them, helps their career and their brand image, but also helps us, right? Because
Mhm.
we're better preparing people for the marketplace. So uh, these practical skills modules will be 10 to 15 hours of sort of self-contained instruction, meaning it's a separate little piece than the curriculum itself that they'll go through, but it's teaching practical application and building on what they've learned in the curriculum in ways that they can actually apply in the workplace. So, for example, at level one of these modules will cover financial modeling. And so that
Mm-hmm.
obviously draws on the FSA readings heavily, for example. And so these videos and some work along exercises will help candidates build a working 3-statement financial model, which is a skill that employers and candidates for years have been saying that they would wish we could teach better. And it was just very hard to teach in something flat like a print book, and even in a digital environment, it can be a challenge. So here now through the videos and the work along exercises, we'll have that opportunity. It's those practical skills modules aren't directly tested, right? Meaning that you don't have to worry about something that we ask in that practical skills module will appear on the exam, but it's indirectly attested in the sense that it's building on what you learned in the program. So that it's still important to take them. I think it will add to your context and understanding when you go to address the examination itself. These practical skills modules can also be completed at any time before you get the results. So if you forget about it and you sit for your exam, you still have this window where you can go take the practical skill module, or you could do it right away, just whenever works best for you. At launch, we'll have 2 of them at level 1. One is the financial modeling that I mentioned, and the other is covering Python programming fundamentals. And that one will cover things like environmental setup, variables, working with data types, and so forth, and really give candidates kind of a baseline working knowledge of Python and how it's used in the industry. And then when you get to level 2, we're launching with 2 more of these practical skills modules, and one of those is a more advanced Python and data science and AI course, and there it's a bit more even tied to the workplace. So there we'll cover things like financial data scraping and wrangling and cleaning, right? Dividend payout prediction, how to ingest and use Edgar data, all of these things that you might be asked to do in the workplace. And then the second module at level 2 is covering analyst skills, which I think is going to be a really interesting one. That one, it covers things like, what are the critical factors of a stock? How do analysts generate insights? How do they choose a methodology for valuation and set target prices? And then even some soft skills like communicating stock calls or time and information management. And then level 3 will have practical skills module as well. Those are just still under development, so we're not quite ready to announce them. So candidates have to take at least one at each level, but they can take both if they want to. That's entirely up to them. And when you get to level 2, you can go back and take the level 1 modules if you wish. So for example, at level 1, if you only take the financial modeling one, and then at level 2, you want to take both the introductory and the more advanced Python module, you can do that. We're trying to be as flexible with that as possible.
Okay, so if I understood correctly, basically each candidate will still have a set of readings to go through that they will need in order to prepare and pass the exam, but then you have this optional practical modules that they can do no matter when, if I'm understanding correctly. They're not obliged to do it before they are prepared for the exam because it's not testable, as you said.
Right. They're obliged to do at least one of them before they get the results for it, but the timing is completely up to them.
Okay, I got it. Okay.
We've already seen a lot of people do it first. They just jump in and get it done. And that's great. You don't have to have gone through the content to go through the practical skills module. I personally think it might help, right? But to get through FSA before you do financial modeling, but those modules are written in such a way as I think you could, especially if you have an undergraduate degree or you're working on one in business, you probably could get through the financial modeling one without having gone through our content.
Okay, perfect. And this is all included in the initial fee that they pay to sign up for the exam, right? They're not paying a separate fee for these practical modules, like financial modeling.
Yeah, it's just included as part of the registration.
Okay, perfect. All right, that's much clearer now. The second change that is happening is introduction of specialized pathways. which is, I'm assuming it's just applicable just a level 3, but I'm not really sure. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that, and maybe just explain us like what the candidates can expect from this.
Yeah, that is applicable just at level 3. So level 1 and 2 candidates don't have to worry about that now. In the future, when a candidate registers for level 3 of the program, they'll pick from one of the 3 pathways. One of those pathways will be essentially the default pathway that we have now. It'll be the same portfolio management path that we've always had. So if someone says they want to go through the program as it exists today, they'll be able to do that. It's just they have to pick that path. But we'll also have 2 new paths. One is private wealth management, and the other is in private markets, which will cover private equity and private debt. The intent with these is not necessarily to make you an expert in private wealth management or private markets, because when you think about it, this is a portion of level 3, right? What they're intended for is to make the content more relevant and applicable for people who either are working in those parts of the industry or aspire to, right? So there'll be a common core at level 3 that exists across all 3 of those paths. But then when you get to the specialized part, the focus will be on application of what you learned within the context of that specialized path. So private wealth management, portfolio management issues, specifically in the context of private wealth and managing high net worth and so forth, and similar with private markets.
Okay, so let's see if I understood properly. So there is this core program in the CFA level 3 that everyone has to go through, and then they have to choose additionally from one of these pathways, right?
Right.
Okay, and will these pathways be tested or not?
Yes.
Yes. And so here's my follow-up question, like how will the exam be created? Like, is it going to be different for from each one of them, because everyone will have a different pathway? Like how will you make sure that everyone is being tested fairly on the same level?
Yeah, we effectively will have 3 versions of the curriculum, even though there's a common core, right? One version will be private wealth management, and it'll have the common core plus that path. And the other version, private markets, will have the common core plus that path. And you are right, we'll have different examinations for each one of those 3 levels. We've gotten pretty good at writing content and exams that are approximately the same difficulty level. Not perfect, right? But there are, in the testing industry, statistical processes that we bring to bear to make adjustments. So, for example, if it turns out that in the private markets pathway, one of our versions of the test there was a little easier than the others, there's psychometric adjustments you can make so that the passing score is adjusted a little bit to compensate, and therefore everyone ends up on a similar playing field.
Okay, I got it. And I'm assuming the level 3 format of the exams will be still the same, essay questions and multiple choice question. I'm assuming there won't be any changes to that.
That is correct. We'll still have we call them item sets, but it's a vignette with
yes, exactly,
related multiple choice, and then we'll also have the constructed response or essay type of question. We may structure the topics just slightly differently. I think one thing we've heard from candidates in the past is it feels like we have ethics and then everything else is portfolio management. It's not super helpful, right? So we're restructuring it. I think really taking it and just categorizing it slightly different so that it's more intuitive and makes more sense to candidates. And so as we get closer, we'll roll out what that structure looks like, but it won't really affect the test. Well, you'd have the same test questions either way within that structure.
Okay, makes sense. All right. So the third change I do want to discuss, it's the number of hours the candidates need to pass the exam. So by default, this is the CFA Institute recommends to study 300 hours. And I never understood like what were the bases of this number, because I personally never studied 300 hours. I study more than that, sometimes even double, especially for some level like level 2, which requires like a lot of hours of study. So I want to understand like now I think the goal is to have each candidate to study or to stick to 300 hours. So how is that going to work, especially with all these changes? Like if a candidate just studies 300 hours, is it enough to pass the exam or not?
Yeah. I've often been careful to say at least 300 hours because a lot depends on your background and coming in. If you're coming in with an undergraduate degree in finance, you probably need to study a lot less that's coming in someone who's still in college and working on a social sciences degree, right? Additionally, some people learn pretty efficiently in kind of a self-directed way, and others it's a bit more of a challenge. I mean, nothing wrong with either one. It's just is what it is, right? So I would say a minimum of 300. And I think years back, the way that we came to 300 was at looking at what candidates reported as how long that they were studying, and then comparing that with, in that group who passed and who failed in aggregate, right? And noting that it seemed like a minimum of 300 was needed to be successful, right? That didn't guarantee success for any one person because you're working with aggregate averages at that point. Now, over the years, what we have seen is the curriculum gradually expand a bit more and a bit more every year because there's always innovations happening in finance. There's always new things. And we've often been loath to take anything out because it's hard to identify what should come out of the program. Additionally, I think in years past, we've not brought instructional design to bear as early as we could have. And what I mean by that is that we wrote the readings as if they were for a college textbook. That model worked really good in the 90s. I think it was what people were used to, and a lot of people coming into the program tended to be more of post university at that point. But college students, for example, coming into the program tend to find that to be pretty dense, right? So we took the opportunity to look at that as well and say, hey, can we teach more efficiently? So bringing this all together, what we're trying to do is remove things first off that's duplicative. That's the low-hanging fruit, right? But also to structure the way that we teach so that it's a bit more efficient, right? And to really leverage the online technology to try to get the point across more quickly and efficiently. And then on top of that, we identified identified sections within readings that the majority of our candidates coming to us have already covered in one way or form in university. And those were some of the introductory quantitative readings. Same thing with economics and financial statement analysis. Just those pieces, and we pull them out and we're calling them pre-reads or prerequisites. So they're not formally tested on the program. And if you're coming in with a finance degree, you can probably safely ignore those. However, they're there for you if you want to look at them and make sure that you've got this content already well in hand. If you're coming to us with a degree that's not in finance, or if you felt like you struggled with that in school, they're there, they're bundled, they don't cost anything else. They're just pulled out of the formal program and held aside as reference, but they're available to you. These steps we're all taking in an attempt to try to bring the volume of the content back down a bit, because what we started to see is when you look at successful candidates, we are starting to see this trend up in how long that they are taking to study for the program. And I personally feel a lot of times like that 300 hours is almost become an implicit brand promise in a way. There's even a website like 300 hours, right? So
yes,
I'm trying to get that back a little bit closer to what's reality, knowing that any individual may spend more than that. But if I can bring it closer to that on average, I'll feel like we're doing a good job.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people that came to me for tips and about like the number of hours, I would always tell them study more than 300 hours, especially because I think if you want to increase the probability of passing the exam is the more you study, the more you practice, the better are the chances that you pass the exam. Because I personally, especially because I work full time, and I think a lot of candidates work full time, it's very hard to stick to 300 hours unless like, you know, you start really early in time and you actually like allocate a certain number of hours each day. Because 300 hours by default, I don't know, I never felt it was enough, like never, especially because I would, for instance, myself, I would just like dig deeper into the topic and I would like really, really study, like I would try to understand and not just to practice. So for me, 300 hours was like not reasonable in a way, especially because I work full time. So
Yeah. You know, the data supports what you're saying as well. I've got some videos on YouTube where we talk about study tips and key success factors for candidates. And when we looked at the data, there is a direct correlation between number of hours studied and the probability of passing. Now, I'm sure at some point diminishing returns set in, but we don't really have enough data on the real high end of that scale to know when those set in. But 400 hours, you do tend to see a higher probability that that person
exactly.
than 300. So if they have
Exactly.
the time, I would highly encourage them to keep at it.
Exactly. That's what I would suggest. So that's what I would tell everyone. All right. So moving on to the fourth change, which I don't know if it's actually a change because I feel like I've always seen it. It's the use of the digital badging. I feel like we always had it because every time someone would like pass a level, we would get like a digital badge. So I'm not really sure if it's actually a change or it's just an enhancement.
There was badging before, so I would
Right.
call it more of an enhancement.
Okay.
And firstly, we're launching like new, I think, better badges as part of this. What we're trying to accomplish with this, though, is to, in the market, emphasize the value of the journey itself, and as opposed to only recognizing the value of the charter at the end, right? So we're doing that not just with throwing new badges out there. That's the easy part, right? We're also uh, trying to achieve this through a combination of reorienting and positioning the program in our marketing, especially with employers, and in that way helping employers to kind of really see the value of having that level one badge on LinkedIn or elsewhere. And
Right.
so I would, in candidates' eyes that are used to us seeing the badge already, the way I might think about it from that perspective is to say, oh, okay, CFA Institute is investing more money in this and making sure employers are well aware of what this means.
Yeah, yeah, because I feel like even before we could just say I passed level one or I passed level two. And I remember getting a badge whenever I would pass the exam. So I was like not really sure if it was like an actual change or if it was just me not being aware of it. But thank you for clarifying.
Of course. Yeah.
Um, so the fifth change is about the additional practice materials. And I know if I remember well, I think we get like two mock exam, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember if it was for each level, but I know for level three, we got like two mock exam. And now I think there is an introduction, like there is, we will be receiving additional practice materials. And so I do want to ask, is it more like for level one or is it just like for all the levels and who will be writing this exam? Because I know that for the CFA level three, the mock exam were written by the CFA Boston Society. And I don't know if it's gonna be the same for like going forward for this additional practice materials.
Yeah. Um, Initially, that will just be for level one. I think we have it in
Okay.
mind to expand it to level two and three because people there want it as well. But the need was most acute at level one, and um, it's a difficult maneuver to pull off. We're going to be delivering 6 additional mock exams as part of this practice pack and 1,000 practice problems. And so that will be available for $299,
Okay.
along with some other things like a PDF version of the curriculum and things like that that candidates may find helpful. I struggled a bit with the pricing it because it's very expensive to produce mock exams, especially because, as you alluded to, at level one, we use our actual live exam writers to also write the mock exam
Okay.
questions, right? And so to write them at that same level that you'll see on the live exam is expensive. So it's really hard as a nonprofit for us to put those out there without trying to recoup some of the costs. But I am happy that it's considerably less expensive than some of the other options out there, right? There's prep providers who have a really good product, and they probably have more questions than us. So I don't think that they're to be ignored, and I don't think that this will usurp or upend their work. I think there's room in the market for both of us, but in a lot of areas in the world, they just can't afford, the higher cost of a prep provider, and I hope that this will be helpful to them.
Right. So that was my follow-up question. If the candidates can still go and purchase materials from approved providers, because there are a lot of them out there who provide videos, practice materials, mock exam, and I know they're very helpful because I also have used a couple of them. So I just wanted to emphasize if they're still okay. They're you can go and purchase these materials.
Oh, of course. Yeah, the candidates are free to do as they wish. And honestly, I mean, I think Kaplan has a lot of good materials, and they're huge in the marketplace. Mark Meldrum has a great suite of videos. So the only ones in the Mark Meldrums of the world do a great job, but they aren't we're not writing test questions from Mark Meldrum's videos or from Kaplan. So if you ever uncover a discrepancy between the two, or a confusion between the two, I would focus on the curriculum, because that's from which we're actually always writing the question.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so we have arrived to the last change, which is the eligibility for level 1 candidates. So I wanted to know, I don't know if it's actually something new, because I remember that when I was in university, I had friends who were in the last year of their degree who could sign up for level 1. I don't know if it's something different than that. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, we extended that. It used to be you had to be in the final year of an undergraduate degree to sign up for level 1. And now we're saying you have to be in the final 2 years of an undergraduate degree. There was a lot of demand among candidates for that. And so that's what got us looking at it. And then we did some testing. And because to be honest, I had a lot of concern about whether someone who's 2 years away from graduating had sufficient exposure to the content and whether they were really ready. And this is a case where I was proven dead wrong. Like when we did testing with people, they actually did quite well as a group. In fact, slightly better than honestly than people who had just graduated. Now that's just a fluke. It was so close. It was not really something you would differentiate statistically. So because of that, we talked a lot with employers and universities and candidates, and really affirmed the demand for it was widespread, and decided to make the change. And since then, that change alone has proved to be extremely popular. That one we launched early, starting back in November, and that one has been wonderful. And thus far, those candidates seem to be doing great. So I think it puts them in a good position to vie for an internship between their junior and senior year. And then they also have the potential. We want to change level 2 next, so that they can get into level 2 when they're in the final year of their undergraduate degree. So if that change we're able to approve, and if it's validated by the market and so on, then candidates will be able to have level 2 under their belt when they go out into the workforce for their first job. And I think it puts them on a better footing.
All right. Okay, sounds good. All right, so I think we cover all the 6 changes that are happening to the CFA program. And I do want to ask you one last question, because I know that the CFA program is really hard, and now we see the passing rates just decreasing. So are there any tips that you can share or resources to people so they can increase the likelihood of passing each of the exams?
Yeah, I'll share the big one. This is unusual. I don't think you'll see this one in a lot of places online. I have a video on YouTube that talks about it, but just to make it direct for your audience, try at all costs to avoid deferring your test. And conversely, if you're a new level 1 candidate, don't be so intimidated by the weaker pass rate slightly. And the reason I say all these things is we went through COVID and the pass rate took a hit.
Yes.
And initially it was, I think, COVID related and
Yes.
very understandable. I mean, people would study for their tests and then we would have to close a test center for COVID reasons. And we're still obliged to follow local regulations. And so if we had to close, we had to close. And so those poor people ended up deferring sometimes 3-6 months. And
Right.
it's hard to keep that knowledge fresh for 3 or 6 months longer, right? Or to face just going through it all again. It becomes difficult. This goes back to what you're saying about putting in more and more time. I mean, you can't let up just because you studied everything in anticipation of that first date. So what I see now when I look back over the past year, for example, is new level 1 candidates coming into the program tend to do right about in line with the historic averages. So it's not easy, right? But it's doable, right? If you really put your mind to it, it's certainly doable. But candidates who defer their exams tend to struggle a little bit more, and we're still digging in to understand that. I look at the numbers in aggregate, and one thing I tend to see is people spending a lot of time on our digital study product in anticipation of taking the test. For whatever reason, they end up having to defer. And then there's not a commensurate amount of activity from leading up to their deferral date. Sounds like I'm blaming a candidate, but I'm just trying to be kind of honest, right? It is hard to maintain that higher level of engagement and study. So my advice is if it's at all possible, don't put yourself in that position. And if in doubt, take the test, right? I have to tell you, when I went to take the level 2 exam, I almost skipped it on an exam day. I just had a lot going on. I had a new baby in the house and just a lot going on and had struggled to keep up with the studies. And but I felt like I was going to be close, so I went in and took it, and I passed. So I was grateful for that, and I did better at level 3. But it's you never know, right?
Yeah, I agree. I must say, I was also intimidated when I signed up for level 1. I was actually very hesitant initially because I would see all this low passing rate that I was like, I don't know if I can do it. But then I would also try to see the positive side, which was there are people who pass it, there are people who have the charter. Why can I not do it? So I try to shift my mindset. And so I started with the program and I was very, very happy about it. And I do agree with you about the deferral because for me, it was for COVID. My level 2 exam got deferred twice, and there is nothing worse than going over the topic twice because it is mentally exhausting, really mentally exhausting. And then, so this wasn't easy. So I was happy when finally I could sit down and give the exam. But I was also thinking about people who failed the exam more than one time and they take 10 years just to pass one level. And then I'm thinking, but how do you do this, like from a mental point of view, because it's really, really tiring. And then you just go over the same material. So I always tell people, like, if you want to increase the chances of passing the exam, like start really early and be consistent with your studies and make sure that you don't skip anything and just be focused and determined. I think that's what you need, and discipline, I would say. So I always tell these people, because honestly, there is nothing worse than not passing, repeating the exam, or deferring the exam, honestly.
Yeah, you're completely right. And I like what you said because there's a lot of truth to that. So having the discipline to study regularly over a longer period is a much better key to success than picking it up and really killing yourself for 3 months.
Yes, exactly. So
And
yeah,
practice, like
and
practice,
practice.
that's another area where the more practice problems someone tends to take, the better they tend to do on the exam. And I think it just practice has a way of really ingraining things better than just reading about them.
Yes, definitely. I definitely agree with you on that. I feel like the key to success or to succeed the exam is really just practicing. And they say practice makes perfect. That's really how it is with the CFA program, literally.
And before we end, there is one thing I wanted to point out that people might find helpful. We have a microsite set up, so if afterward they still want to dig in a little bit more on these changes that are coming, it's evolve.cfainstitute.org, and on there there is just a ton of information and some videos about what it is that's coming. And then on our regular website, we also have materials I think people will find happy or helpful. It's a career assessment, and are you ready for career assess? And you can find that on our website as well. Ermi, maybe we can send you a link that you can put in the notes or something
for
to
sure.
make it easy for people to find.
For sure, for sure. We'll put all the information, all the links you said in the description so people can go back to those. All right, Chris. Chris, I want to thank you so much for this interview. It was such an honor. As I said, it was such a pleasure. I'm very, very happy that you agreed to do this with me. And I really want to thank you once again.
It was my pleasure. I mean, I'm happy to do it anytime. I'm just glad we can reach your audience. I want everyone to see these changes coming. We're excited about them, and I think they're going to make the program more valuable for all of us, members and candidates alike, over time.
Definitely. So thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for being here with me today.
Anytime. Take care.